Hey guys, Political Junkie 2414 here, and welcome to my final 2022 United States gubernatorial election prediction. We are just 2 days, in fact, less than 2 days now, until the 2022 midterms this Tuesday. It's going to be really exciting, and I will be making my Senate prediction, probably releasing it tomorrow, and if possible, I will try to get out my Senate election night, but I don't think I'm going to be able to get my governor one out, in time. So if you guys want, like after the midterms, if you want to see what I was, an election night, my election night for the governor's races, I will let you see them. But I think that the Senate election night's more important to release. And besides, I'm making predictions, for the House, Senate, and governors, so you guys are gonna know what I predict on these races through this video. This is the video to come back to and make fun of me when I get a lot of these races wrong. Hopefully not, but I have a feeling, I probably will be wrong about at least one state on this map. We got some very competitive governor races here, a lot of them in taboo areas, safe blue, safe red states, ones that you wouldn't really expect to be super competitive. But, governor's races are, a lot different than federal races, and we have some pretty unique candidates in a lot of these races, you know? And when you look at the governor's races, you see, a lot of, you see, well, actually, um, let me get away from that thought. So on the generic ballot, which is for the House popular vote, but it's pretty indicative of the national environment, Republicans still hold a lead 2 days before the election, and I do believe that they're going to win the majority in the National Governors Association. I've been pretty I think that that's pretty much a consensus, but Democrats do have a fighting chance at winning a number of these key competitive races, and I do believe that they're going to win quite a few. So let's start off with the safe states. These are the states that will go to either party by over 15 percentage points. For the Democrats, we have 6 states. We have California, Hawaii, which, Hawaii is an open seat, but Josh Green is going to succeed David Ige. Maryland and Massachusetts are Democratic pickups. Larry Hogan and Charlie Baker are the Republican governors of Maryland and Massachusetts. Both of whom are leaving office. They're very moderate, pragmatic Republicans who were able to win in these deep blue states in the past. But in Maryland, Hogan was term limited, and in Massachusetts, Charlie Baker was run out of town by Donald Trump, through a primary threat. So, and then the GOP picked pretty extreme candidates, and so these states are going to return back to their normal democratic nature, and they're going to flip back towards the Democrats easily. Illinois, I could see this being under 15, but JB Pritzker is, not is an underrated incumbent, I think, by a lot of people. I don't think he's definitely not amazing, but I think he's not as unpopular as some say he is. And I do believe that Darren Bailey's not like an extremely good candidate. He had a good primary performance, but at the end of the day, it's still Illinois, still a blue state, and Tammy Duckworth's going to win by a lot in the Senate race as well. Republicans never had a chance in Illinois, and they don't now. Colorado, this is a state where you would expect Republicans to be pretty competitive, but Jared Polis is just so insanely popular. Even though Republicans nominated an all right candidate in Heidi Gainel, she had no chance at beating Polis, and with polls in Colorado actually underestimating Democratic support pretty often, pretty on a pretty often basis or regular basis. The fact that Polis is already up by 14 points, and when polls in Colorado tend to underestimate Democrats by like 1 or 2 points, that gets you to over a safe margin. He's going to outrun Michael Bennett at the top of the ticket, but both are going to win anyways. So that's it for the safe blue states. Now we're going to go to the safe Republican states. We have Idaho, Wyoming, South Dakota. I know that there was an interesting Republican internal back in September that showed Kristi Noem in a competitive race, but I don't think that's what's going to happen. Nebraska, Pete Ricketts, may actually, well, I mean, he's term limited, but he may actually be appointed to Ben Sass's Senate seat after, at the beginning of next year, or, in December of this year, because Sass is resigning from his Senate seat. And, Jim Pillen's obviously going to win this race. It might be a little bit closer than usual, because I think Carol Blood has run a pretty good campaign, and Democrats had a good sign in that House special election back in June, right after Roe was overturned. but Nebraska is a safe red state, and Jim Pillen will be the next governor of Nebraska, and I do believe he's going to appoint Ricketts to the Senate to replace Sass. It's possible that he doesn't, but either way, Nebraska is a safe red state. Not a lot to talk about there. Arkansas, Sarah Huckabee Sanders is going to replace Asa Hutchinson. Tennessee and Alabama are very solid for the GOP. Iowa and Ohio, Kim Reynolds and Mike DeWine are going to win easily. The Democrats really don't have a fighting chance here. Ohio might have gotten interesting if Mike DeWine got primaried out in the primary by Jim Renacci or some other candidate like Joe Blystone. But Nan Whaley is just not really that strong of a candidate. She's underperforming Tim Ryan by a significant amount, which isn't I don't think that she's as bad as some people say she is as a candidate, but she still has no chance against DeWine. And in Iowa, Kim Reynolds is very popular. The Democrat really isn't running that a very noticeable campaign at all. And she's gonna Reynolds is probably gonna outperform Chuck Grassley at this point. Grassley has had quite a bit of trouble recently in his Senate race, but Iowa's a right trending state, and both are gonna win anyways. Finally, we have Vermont and New Hampshire, which may surprise you. If you're not too familiar with the governorships of these two states, but Phil Scott in Vermont and Krista Nunu in New Hampshire are very unique kinds of Republicans. They're pretty moderate, governors, and they're beloved by their states, by Democrats and independents alike. And both are extremely popular. Krista Nunu is more, traditionally conservative, but both are both Scott and Sununu are going to easily win their re-elections. It looked like Sununu might have been in a likely Republican race because his approval ratings weren't too great, but he's going to win easily. So now we have 19, likely lean or tilt states. These are the states that are, not necessarily safe for one party. Ones are not super competitive, and the others are highly competitive. We're going to start off with the likely states. Republicans are at 19 governorships. Democrats are at 12. We'll start off with the likely Democratic states. The first one I'm going to do is the state of Minnesota. Tim Walz is very popular in the state. Scott Jensen is not necessarily a bad candidate, but he has really lost a lot of his momentum. This race could have been a sleeper flip for the GOP if they, held on to the momentum they had, like after Glenn Youngkin's win in Virginia. But Walz has just skyrocketed in the polling. Jensen has no money, and the only polls that show him up, there was only, this one poll from Trafalgar, which I think we all know, what to think of them. They're the same people that say Washington is within 5 points the Senate race. They have Jensen up by one, but all these other reputable pollsters have Walz up by most of them by a likely margin. Even Jensen's own campaign poll has him down. So yeah, Minnesota's not a safe blue state by any means. But I think it's pretty clear that Wallace is going to win. It's still a pretty blue state, and I think that he's going to underperform his 2018 margin. Probably, pretty clearly. It's a redder year. It's a lot redder of a year, and we're in a lot more beneficial of a Republican. So we're in a much better environment for the GOP nationally than we were in 2018. But Walz is still going to win nonetheless. The next likely Democratic state is the state of New York. We've gotten a lot of hype about New York recently. Lee Zeldin has been doing surprisingly well in the polling. Kathy Hochul's extremely unpopular, but at the end of the day, I know, governors' races are very unique in a lot of these instances, in that they're very, they're not susceptible to the national partisanship of their states. But I do still believe that, Kathy Hochul, being a Democrat in a state that hasn't elected a Republican to statewide office since 2002, is still going to win. Zeldin is going to have to really, really run up the numbers. I don't believe that. I could see the race being single digits, and it will be under 15 points. I always thought that Hochul was going to underperform, and I really do think that a part of this race becoming competitive is, because of Andrew Cuomo's scandals and, Hochul, being a pretty, getting tied to that by Zeldin, and, Zeldin just having a lot of the momentum. And, I think that, him being at the top of the ticket's really going to help Republicans, especially in some of the House races in New York. But at the end of the day, he's still going to lose statewide. Connecticut and Rhode Island are two likely states. Connecticut, Bob Stefanowski was a really good candidate for the GOP back in 2018, and he's not. It's not that he isn't now, but he's suffering from the repeat candidate syndrome, where the second time, it's like with Stacey Abrams in Georgia, which we'll talk about in a second. Lamont, Ned Lamont is a lot more popular now, and he has a record. Bob Stefanowski, he's a very strong candidate, and considering that he came so close in 2018 in such a blue year, and we're in a much redder year now, he should honestly be really winning this race. But he's not, and he's not doing nearly as well. He's suffering, from the fact that he doesn't have the same momentum as he did 4 years ago. But I do believe that he can get the race down to single digits. Although I do still expect Lamont to win by like 11 or 12 points, but it will be under 15. It is still mildly competitive, but Connecticut is not going to be nearly as competitive as it was 4 years ago. Rhode Island, I know a lot of people have been saying that this is a sleeper race for the Republicans. Honestly, I don't really think it is. I know that Dan McKee is a very unpopular incumbent, but incumbency really helps parties along, really helps the party holding something a lot of the way. If you look back at Pennsylvania's Senate election in 2010, Joe Sestak beat out Arlen Specter, who was at that point a Democrat, had become a Democratic Senate, or, had switched to the Democratic Party. And he went on to lose that race against Pat Toomey. I think, it's pretty clear that incumbency helps even with an unpopular incumbent. That's why you never hear anyone saying that Joe Biden really needs to, be primaried out. I mean, well, obviously you hear some people, but, that would not be good for the party at large because it would hurt their chances in 2024. And so I do think, Ashley Calouse, I don't really know a lot about her, but she seems to be a decent candidate. I think she can get it possibly within single digits, but I really don't see how Republicans win in Rhode Island. Yeah, they have a good candidate in Alan Fung for that House race, but I mean, it's still a blue state. It's right trending, but it's not super right trending at the same time. And finally, the state of Maine is our final likely state. The argument on the right for Paul LePage winning is the Susan Collins polling error in 2020, which on the surface makes a lot of sense. But when you look back at the 2020 presidential polls, you'll see that Biden was up by 13 points in Maine. He won it by 9. You go back and, you look at previous polling misses in Maine, they are nothing compared to what the error was for that Senate race in 2020. That really just, to me, says that the error was more underestimating Susan Collins' support as a candidate in general, and I don't think that it really was indicative of anything terribly wrong with Maine polling. And I think LePage is also suffering the same repeat candidate syndrome. He's got a lot of appeal in Maine, and he'll outperform Trump most likely. But he's still down by 8 points in the polls, and even when you apply the 2020 polling miss from the state of from the presidential polling miss, he's down by 4. I think this race could be lean, and LePage still has kind of a chance, but I mean it's Maine. It's he didn't win a majority of his vote in either election, and while he doesn't have to deal with ranked choice voting this in a a statewide race, he's still going to need to win a majority when he's up against Mills in a one-on-one race, and I don't think that Mills is a bad enough incumbent to lose, especially considering that she actually was able to win a majority of the vote in 2018 when there was an independent on the ballot, which is something that LePage couldn't do. And I forgot one likely state. Pennsylvania is our last likely Democratic state. Josh Shapiro, I think, is a pretty clear favorite over Doug Mastriano. I was, pretty skeptical of people saying that Mastriano had no chance at victory at first, but watching how he's just collapsed in the polls and his, the scandals that have come out about him, his the image of him wearing that Confederate uniform in as a college student or in military school has really just destroyed his chances. It's not just that, he's just an extremely bad candidate, and he's dragging down Dr. Oz in the Senate race as well, although, Oz has a much better chance than Mastriano. There was a time, though, when it looked like Josh Shapiro might be in more danger than John Fetterman was, but that's clearly not true. As Fetterman has gotten, as his polling numbers, as the Senate race has tightened, Shapiro's grown a much larger lead over Mastriano in the governor's race. Trafalgar already has him, has the Trafalgar, which was the pollster that, said Trump would win Pennsylvania in 2020, has Mastriano down. It's an improvement from their Shapiro +9 poll a month ago, but I mean, he's still down. All the reputable pollsters show Shapiro up by high single digits, sometimes even double digits. And I do think that, Pennsylvania is not going to be like a double digit victory for Shapiro, but I do think, he's a very strong candidate. And, Mastriano just, I would be shocked if he wins. He's not running a good campaign. He's not doing anything, to really get his message out there. While Shapiro's really been able to smack him on the airwaves. So yeah, I do think that Shapiro's a pretty clear favorite. I would be shocked if Mastriano won this race. So now we're going to get into the likely Republican states. First one is Alaska. Mike Dunleavy is pretty clearly a favorite. The ranked choice voting could make this race interesting. But I do think that, despite Mary Peltola's win, that was more because, Sarah Palin was a really bad candidate and she's just a very unique Democrat. I do think that either Bill Walker or Les Guerra, it's either going to be Bill Walker or Les Guerra in the second round against Dunleavy, unless, Dunleavy just wins outright. But I do think that it will, I think it'll go to a second round of ranked choice voting. I think you'll also see a lot of Murkowski voters come around for Dunleavy. I don't think he's that controversial of an incumbent to lose. I know that like the historical thing is that Alaska doesn't like to reelect its governors, and I do think Walker has like a small chance. But I do still think he or Guerra would lose to Dunleavy. Alaska's still the red state, and because even though Mary Peltola won, that's more so saying she's essentially like the Sherrod Brown of Alaska, as I say. She's a Democrat who's able to win in a state that's ancestrally a Republican. Is shifting to the left, but it's not going to be enough. I think that Alaska's pretty clearly going to the GOP. Oklahoma, I'm moving down to likely. There's been a lot of hype about this one too. Kevin Stitt's not doing too well against Joy Hoffmeister. I've always been interested in this race potentially getting closer, but Oklahoma's polls are just so bad that I don't really see a way, that Hoffmeister wins. They've been reputable, or well, not really reputable because Oklahoma doesn't really have many great pollsters, but Stitt's only up by 3 in the 538 aggregate. His own internal poll only has him up by 13. Emerson has him up by 10, and some of these other polls like Sooner, which isn't great, but they have Hoffmeister up. There's even one that has Hoffmeister up by 7. So she's doing pretty well, and down ballot, Oklahoma's a lot bluer than it is federally. But at the same time, it's still, Stitt, even though he's insanely unpopular, he's gonna underrun, he's gonna underperform Trump by an insane amount. But I do think he's still going to win by double digits, probably a little bit less than 15, probably like 13 or 14. The next likely state is South Carolina. Joe Cunningham's been running an interesting campaign, but he's no Jamie Harrison. Henry McMaster did underperform his polls in 2018, and he's not the worst or the best incumbent. He's not insanely popular, but he's also not insanely unpopular, and it's still South Carolina. Cunningham will do well with more like probably more like independent like kind of he'll do well with like some of those you know what I mean, the conservative, some white moderately conservative voters in South Carolina that tend to be more friendly to Democrats on the local level. But I do think that McMaster's probably going to win by like 11, 12, maybe 13 points. It's not going to be super close. I don't see how Democrats win here. Jamie Harrison was really good at getting out the black vote against Lindsey Graham, and he still lost by double digits. Yes, he outperformed Biden, but South Carolina is still the red state by heart, and there's nothing suggesting that McMaster loses. But, the polls there have been interesting. Like Trafalgar only had McMaster up by 7 in September, but I expect him to win by more than that, but still under 15 points. Florida, the early vote looks awful for Democrats. I could honestly see Ron DeSantis winning by over 15 points. He and Marco Rubio have always been on track for reelection. I've, been pretty, I've been very consistent with characterizing both Florida's Senate and governor's races as likely Republican. There was a time back in early September when, Val Demings and Charlie Crist looked like they had a lot of momentum, and I considered moving, especially the Senate race, down to lean red. But at the end of the day, it doesn't really seem like much is, changing that. Rubio's probably going to underperform DeSantis, which is surprising considering Rubio's probably is Hispanic, and he probably has more appeal to Hispanics than DeSantis does. But Christ also doesn't have the same energy, I guess, with minority voters that Val Demings has. And Florida's going red by double digits. It might even be safe, but I do think DeSantis is probably going to win by 13, 14 at this rate. Like, it looks really bad for Democrats, and just a sign that we kind of need to abandon Florida for a little while. Not really that competitive anymore, and DeSantis is easily going to win, and he's probably going to run for president. So yeah. I'm moving back up to likely. Beto O'Rourke isn't outperform does overperform his polls by quite a bit, but Greg Abbott's grown a lead over him. All the nonpartisan pollsters show him up. Texas is definitely shifting blue, but at the end of the day, even though Abbott's like a lot more polarizing than he was 4 years ago, he's still a Republican in a state that's, it's still, Texas is still a Republican leaning state. It's becoming more competitive, and I expect it to flip blue eventually. I think O'Rourke was a very good candidate for the Democrats, but he just he's running in the wrong year, and he needs to wait a little while. I don't think, I think that, Abbott being an outperformer, he's going to underperform his 2018 margin, and I think, he's going to win by like 7 or 8, but it's not going to be like it's not going to be under 5% in my opinion. It sucks because I really like Beto O'Rourke, but we have to recognize that Texas isn't going to go blue yet. We got to wait longer. And finally, this is a change from last time. I'm going to move Georgia up to likely Republican. I understand that Stacey Abrams, is a strong candidate, but she doesn't have the same momentum she had 4 years ago. Brian Kemp has a very good record, or not in my opinion. Obviously, I'm not saying this in my opinion, but like, because I'm supporting Abrams, but I know that she's not going to win. Kemp is growing a very large lead over Abrams, and while I don't think he's going to win by, like 10, like double digits, like some of these polls are saying, I do think he's going to win by like 5 or 6. I think he avoids a runoff. Abrams, hasn't been doing, well, I'm not going to say she hasn't been trying to reach out to black men because she has, but it's really out of her control. Kemp is doing very well with white suburban voters in the Atlanta area. I know that, the diversification of the suburbs have made the state a lot more democratic, and Abrams is very strong with black voters. She'll do very well, but she's going to underperform Raphael Warnock with, swing voters in the Atlanta suburbs, and she's just really not she's not getting the numbers that she needs with black men, and I do think that, Kemp, Georgia's more Republican down ballot, and Kemp is a good candidate for the suburbs. We saw Johnny Isaacson outperform Trump by so much in 2016 in the Senate race, and I know that Georgia's a lot bluer back then, and I do think Stacey Abrams, is probably going to be governor of Georgia one day, but that time is just not now. I think that she doesn't really have a chance anymore. Her only chance is to get Kemp under 50% and make him go into a runoff, and I honestly Kemp's already at 50% of the vote. He's almost at 52%, and he's leading, with the majority of the vote in most of these polls. Even Democratic internals show him up. So, yeah, I think it's really over for Abrams, sadly. But she'll probably run in 2026, and yeah, so, not her career is not over, but it's just not, this is not her time. So now we've got 7 races, which will be decided under 5%. These are the lean and tilt races. These are the races that are going to be really, really competitive. We're going to start off with the lean states, which will go to either party by which will go to either party by a margin of 1 to 5%. We'll start off with the Republican states. The first one is Wisconsin. Tony Evers is, not doing very well. He's outperforming Mandela Barnes by a lot, and there's been kind of a rebound for Barnes and Evers recently. But Tim Michaels, I do think that he was the worst choice for the GOP. I think that if Rebecca Cleafish won, this race would be a lot closer to likely are than it is to toss up. But Trafalgar, which, is this is Wisconsin's a state where they're very accurate, and I do think, Wisconsin's polls are pretty, accurate in midterm years, but I do think that Evers is in a lot of trouble. He's not doing as well as he did with the white working class voters before. Ron Johnson's going to do really well at the top of the ticket. Republicans are poised to flip Ron Kind's seat in the House, and every single nonpartisan pollster except for Siena, which was not super accurate in 2020, um is shows Michael's ahead. So, he's probably going to win by like 2 points. I don't think the polling error is going to be, I do not believe that Johnson's going to win the Senate race by double digits, and anyone who's saying that is I don't know what to think of them. But I think that Evers is going to go down. He could surprise us all. He got a better candidate. He got a weaker candidate than he should have. But not saying he deserves it. That he deserved to be kicked out because I am supporting him, of course. But you know what I mean. Rebecca Cleafish looked like she was going to be the nominee for a while, and then she didn't end up being. So yeah, I think Evers is in a lot of trouble, and he's probably going to lose. Nevada, I think that's also going to be a lean red state. Joe Lombardo is doing insanely well. He's outperforming Adam Laxalt in the Senate race, which makes sense because Sisolak is not, as strong with Hispanic voters as Cortez Masto. But he's up by 2 points in the polling aggregate almost. Every single nonpartisan pollster shows him ahead. And, Sisolak, I think, is just, Republicans do a lot better on the statewide level in Nevada. The John Ralston came up with his with who's for the record, John Ralston is an analyst of early vote data in Nevada. He's been pretty correct in the past. He's been pretty accurate with his predictions in the past, and he says that the numbers don't look too great for Democrats. I think that Lombardo, being the sheriff of Clark County, is going to, make the race a lot closer. He's becoming, he's been able to dodge the abortion issue, um, in a way that has really, made it so that he's not affected. Sisolak had a really good chance beforehand, and I still think he does have a chance to win this race, but he's not doing well in Clark County, and abortion doesn't really seem to be working too well for Democrats, probably because Nevada is a state where abortion's already legal. And while I do believe that Laxalt and Lombardo are, pro-life and would, put in anti-abortion legislation, I'm not the people of Nevada, and they are probably going to elect Joe Lombardo as their next governor. In the lean republic, the last lean red state, in my opinion, is Arizona. I do think that Katie Hobbs has gotten a little bit of a boost as of late, but her deciding not to debate Carrie Lake is was a pretty big mistake. I do understand that the debates don't mean everything, but Hobbs doesn't really seem to have it in her, and it's really upsetting. It wasn't what I expected, and most of the nonpartisan polls have the fact that polls in Arizona do underestimate Democrats, have historically underestimated Democrats, does give me hope for Hobbs. But at the end of the day, I think that Blake, is going to outperform Blake Masters by a couple of points, and she's going to do a lot better in the Phoenix suburbs. She puts out, she kind of twists the extremism of her campaign in a way that appeals to a lot of voters, and so I do think that she's going to win by 1.5, 2 points at the end of the day. Could be tilt, and I could see Hobbs still winning, but I do think that she's still a clear underdog. So that's it for the lean red states. Now we got the lean Democratic states. Michigan, I'm moving down to lean. Tudor Dixon's gotten, has had a resurgence recently, but the abortion ballot being on, but the abortion referendum on the ballot is going to help Democrats. Dixon was still not a good candidate, and Gretchen Whitmer is still, a very strong incumbent for this race. She, was very vulnerable at one time. I thought she was more vulnerable than Tony Evers, but the GOP really messed up with their choice here, and while I do think Dixon has a shot, she has a much better shot than I originally anticipated. She's still not the favorite. Still, there's only one poll that shows her up, and even Republican pollsters are still showing her down or in a dead heat, and they're probably overestimating her chances. So I do think that Whitmer's going to win by a lot less than last time. It'll probably be like 3.5 or 4 points. But Michigan's polls are usually the most accurate out of these three Rust Belt states: Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. So I do think Whitmer's on track for a second term. Now we got New Mexico. Mark Ronchetti, I do think is a pretty, I do think Michelle Lujan Grisham is going to win. Things have gotten a little bit better for Mark Ronchetti, and I do, he's a good candidate for the GOP. He's definitely one of their best recruits this cycle in the governor's races, but he's, he has narrowed up the race somewhat, but he's still not doing nearly as well as he was originally. Lujan Grisham's going to do a lot worse than she did 4 years ago. But as you can see, it's pretty much a dead toss, a pure toss up in the summer. And, now, Lujan Grisham's grown her lead a little bit. It's gone down a little bit. And I do think Ronchetti does have a chance because, turnout in New Mexico can be pretty wonky, but it doesn't look, the early vote numbers don't look too great for Republicans. And New Mexico's still a pretty blue state. And so I do think that, Ronchetti's got a chance, but he's, still down in most pollsters. And I know polls aren't everything, but New Mexico's still traditionally a Democratic state. But, then again, it shouldn't be this close, and it's close because Lujan Grisham's unpopular and it's a governor's race. And it's, governor's races have the potential to be a lot different than federal races. The final lean state for Democrats is Oregon. This is a change from last time. I had it as Tilt R. Tina Kotek, I think, has definitely gotten a boost from this race being nationalized. Betsy Johnson has lost a lot of her momentum. You know, I talked about, in late September and early October how Drazen had finally taken the lead, and see, she was surging. She was up by 3 points, but then the race got nationalized. Democrats actually started to come back and campaign here. And Emerson shows Kotek up by 6. We've had a lot of weird polling here. Trafalgar shows Drazen up by 1. And Johnson's really declining in the polls. She's only at 10% now, and she might even get less than that, to be honest. So, do Republicans have a chance to flip Oregon still? Yes, I've always fought that, even back when Oregon looked like pretty clearly a likely lean D race. But Kotek surged, and polls in Oregon do tend to underestimate Democrats, especially on the governor's level. So now we have the final state, the state of Kansas. Republicans are at 28, Democrats are at 21. I don't know who's going to win Kansas. It's a tilt race. It's a pure toss-up in my mind. Laura Kelly has, been doing very well in polling, even though the abortion issue hasn't really been talked about. We finally got our Kansas polling aggregate just like days before the election. Emerson, which had Kelly losing in 2018, has her up by 5. I don't think she's going to win by 5. But Schmidt, I do think that he's not a bad enough candidate to foil this race. But I do think that he's not like a Chris Kobach level bad. He's not a Chris Kobach, he is not Chris Kobach levels of bad to bungle this race for the GOP. But at the same time, like, Laura Kelly's very popular. She's got a lot of momentum. And, while my gut's telling me to put this race as tilt Democratic, when when I go on the elections shuffler and I try to make a path for Kelly, it's really hard. I think she'll do really well in the suburbs. She's going to outperform Biden by double digits, but I do still think that, going off of, partisanship, which isn't the most important in governor's races, but it is still, fairly important, I am going to give Schmidt the narrow victory here. It's tilt, it's a pure toss up. I could see it really going either way, and I wouldn't be surprised if Kelly wins. If she does win, that's a testament to Democrats, and I think that that's I think that that's a compelling reason to possibly nominate her for Senate in 2026, although I, would want to look into that a little bit more. But yeah, I do think Schmidt has a narrow advantage. I think that the polls, Emerson does definitely overestimate Republicans most of the time, but I think that they're accounting for underestimating Kelly in 2018. And Schmidt, he's, there are going to be a lot of voters, as an unbiased election prediction said, that don't mind Kelly. They really like her, but they don't have any reason to vote for her when they have, when there's, a strong candidate like Derek Schmidt who's not really going to alienate the Republican base that much. It's going to be a lot closer than the national partisanship would suggest, but that's because it's a governor's race. And I do think in the end, Laura Kelly will narrowly lose, but I would not be surprised, you know, if she didn't, because when I go to build a path for her on the election shuffler, you have to make these crazy shifts, in the Kansas suburbs and everything. And while I think that that's possible and she will outperform Biden by a lot, she also has to get really good. She has to bring down Schmidt's margins in the rural areas by quite a bit. And right now, I don't see that being enough. So Kansas is going to be tilt Republican. So in the final map, this is my final prediction for the 2022 gubernatorial races. I have Republicans at 29 governorships, Democrats at 21. Republicans pick up Nevada, Kansas, and Wisconsin, while Democrats pick up Maryland and Massachusetts. And overall, Republicans net a gain of 1 seat in the National Governors Association. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. We are so close to the midterms. I'll be putting out my Senate prediction either tomorrow or Tuesday, probably probably tomorrow. I might record it today just so just in case I have, some personal business to take care of this week. I'll try to get my election night out before Tuesday night. And yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Make sure to like and subscribe to the channel, share the video, turn on notifications. This is the video to come back at to roast me when you see the states that I got wrong. Check out my non-political channel, Interactor127, and my second channel, Political Junkie 2414, and my comrades channel, Growlingzoo666. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. It's been a long journey, and I'm really excited to see how these governor races turn out. And yeah, I'll see you guys in my Senate prediction, and next time when I talk about all things politics. See ya.